When I was in 6th grade, I went to go visit my little cousins at their house. Their house was right on the edge of these woods, and the woods were really thick, and our parents always told us not to go there. And one time I asked my mom why, and she said because when people do bad things, they sometimes go and hide in the woods. I was staying at my cousin's house for a week on this one trip, and whenever I was bored, I would go look out the window and watch the woods. Usually it was pretty boring, and I would just be staring at trees, but one day it was like 5 p.m. and the sun was setting, so it was getting dark, and I saw something moving in the woods. I told my uncle, and he said it was probably just an animal, and I told him no, it was tall and looked like a skinny lady. And he said I have a creative imagination and it was probably just a deer. But then a few minutes later, I heard my aunt and uncle whispering in the kitchen. My aunt was talking about a woman from the psychiatric hospital in their town who had escaped. Their house was like 15 minutes away from a maximum security psychiatric hospital for criminals with mental illness. And then they saw me listening to them in the doorway and they stopped talking completely. A few days later, in the middle of the night, I heard a noise. So I woke up in the middle of the night from this noise coming from downstairs. It sounded like something was scratching the back door. But when I got downstairs, the noise had stopped. But when I looked at the window facing the woods, there were footprints in the snow. But my aunt and uncle were really strict, and they had this rule that we weren't allowed to go in their room when they were sleeping. So I made sure all the doors were locked, and I decided I would tell them in the morning. The next morning we woke up and it was a really intense blizzard. Such heavy snowfall that we couldn't see the ground. So when I told my aunt and uncle about the footprints, they didn't believe me and told me it was probably a nightmare. The next day I had to leave, and I didn't go back and visit my cousins for a long time. But the next summer, my cousins really wanted me to come for their birthday party. Before visiting them, I looked up whether they had ever found the woman who had escaped from the hospital. And Google said that authorities were still looking for her and it was a high priority case. When I got to their house, I was playing with my cousins. They were about to turn 6 years old, and one of them goes, "Let's go check if she's there." And my cousin runs to the window facing the woods. So I asked my other cousin who she was talking about, and she goes, "Oh, don't worry, that's just her imaginary friend." But I knew that did not sound right.
This is why you should be careful working in food delivery. When the pandemic hit, I lost my job and signed up to work for a food delivery app. I was making good money and the tips were nice too. During the first few months of working, I never had any weird experiences or customers. For the most part, everything was fine. There were times when I was a little scared of dropping off the food because it was in sketchy neighborhoods or it was dark outside, but nothing ever happened. I started feeling confident in my position and I let my guard down. One night, I got a delivery request and the tip was bigger than the total order. When I looked at the details of how to drop it off, I realized why the tip was so big. The instructions asked if I could open the door and bring it inside of the house as they were bedbound and unable to walk to the door. I knew I shouldn't do it. It was super against company policy, but I had an aunt who was bedbound and it hit a soft spot. When I opened the door of the house, I was hit with the most vile stench that's ever hit my nose. I looked around and called out to the customer. It was silent for a few seconds. Suddenly, someone croaked out, "I'm back here, come on down." The voice came from a bedroom down the hallway that was pitch black. As I walked towards the room, my stomach was turning. I entered the room and put the order down, but I didn't see anyone. When I turned around to leave, suddenly a man appeared. Part 2 of why you should be careful working in food delivery. This man was tall, wore glasses, and was balding. He was also fully functional from what I could tell. In this moment, I realized how badly I had messed up. I was cornered away from the doorway. He thanked me for dropping off his order. I politely replied, "You're welcome," and tried to step around him to leave. He took a step in the same direction at the same exact moment and asked me what I was up to for the rest of the night. My heart was pounding out of my chest, but I quickly replied that I had another order to drop off and that they were waiting, so I had to go. However, he didn't move. Somehow, I mustered up enough courage to step towards him and say, "Excuse me, I really have to go." His hand was on the door and I knew he was either going to let me go or shut it and attack me. He stared at me for a moment, then hesitated and stepped out of the way. I quickly slipped past him and made a beeline for the front door. As I twisted the doorknob, I heard his footsteps running towards me. I swiftly opened the door, slammed it behind me, and sprinted towards my car. I felt the adrenaline rushing through my veins. I looked back to see if he was running after me, but he was just standing in the doorway, watching me run away with a smirk on his face. I never should have gone inside for a delivery, and I never will again.
Can you solve this mystery? This is a story about a young girl whose brother confessed to killing their parents, but things are not as they seem. All the clues to what really happened are hidden in what I'm about to say. So one day this young girl decided to tell her friend about the terrible tragedy. Her friend asked about what happened to her brother after the confession. She said he got arrested, went to trial, and eventually was found guilty and sentenced to death by lethal injection. During the execution, her brother never said a word. He gave no explanation and just stared at her blankly as they gave him the injection. The young girl admitted after that she couldn't eat or sleep. She had so many questions, but no one left to give her answers. She tried to block out the terrible memories and suffered from depression and even amnesia. The friend suggested she go to a psychic to find some answers, so she did. She asked, "What drove my brother to lose his mind?" And the psychic said, "Your brother was always perfectly sane." The girl asked, "So then why did my brother kill our parents?" And the psychic said, "Your brother was only responsible for the death of one person." Suddenly, the girl understood everything. She broke down crying. What really happened to this family? Can you solve this mystery? This is why you should never talk to strangers in an elevator. One day, a surgeon was working the night shift at a hospital. He just finished his operation on a patient and was going to the basement. He entered the elevator and there was one other woman already inside. They were casually chatting when the elevator door opened and another woman was about to enter. But the surgeon looked horrified. He quickly slammed the close button and punched the highest floor of the building. Surprised, the woman asked why he was being so rude and wouldn't let the other woman in the elevator with them. The surgeon explained that in this hospital, all patients wear white wristbands with their names printed on them, but the red wristbands are placed on all of the corpses. The surgeon then looks to the woman in the elevator with him and says, "That was the same woman I just operated on. She died on the operating table. Didn't you see the red wristband she was wearing?" The woman in the elevator with him just smiled, raised her arm, and said, "You mean like this one?"
This is why you need a security system for your house. A few years ago, I was renting a house in Northern California. The neighborhood was just outside of the suburbs. It seemed like the perfect balance of having space and having nice neighbors close enough not to feel isolated. The area had no streetlights, so it was very dark at night, but it didn't bother me. I got home from work one evening in midwinter. It was a cloudy night, so pulling up, I only saw what my headlights and porch light illuminated. When I got out of my car, I caught a whiff of cigarette smoke. That was odd as I had never smelled that before around my house, but I didn't see anyone nearby, so I ignored it and went inside. I had just gotten off a shift with a few hours of overtime and I was exhausted. It wasn't even 7 yet, but I decided to call it an early night. I woke up sometime later when I heard a noise inside of my house. I wasn't immediately worried because my best friend had a spare key and would sometimes come over. However, he'd always text me and let me know, but when I checked my phone, there were no messages. I called out my friend's name. There were a few seconds of silence before I heard someone stomping as they ran through the bottom floor. I leapt out of bed and ran to the closet. They were already up the stairs by the time I opened the door and stepped inside. I was terrified. That's when I heard them thunder down my hall. Part 2, why you need a security system for your house. The house had 2 bedrooms on either hallway and a bathroom. The bedroom doors were closed, but the bathroom door was creaked open. I was so lucky in that moment because he sprinted to the bathroom. That gave me just enough time to open the attic access in my closet and pull myself up. As I lifted myself, I heard the person run towards my room. I had just pulled my feet inside when my bedroom door burst open. He walked in and stopped. When he didn't see me, he went and checked the other room, then came back and turned on the light. A moment later, he ripped open my closet door. After a few seconds, he stepped away and I heard a loud crash come from my room, followed by a scream of frustration and anger. Then he went downstairs. I had left my phone when I ran for the closet and wasn't sure I could climb down without him hearing. After some time, the noises stopped. I counted to 1,000, then climbed down to call the police. My bed had been flipped, furniture knocked over, and all my things destroyed. The only thing missing was a knife from my kitchen. The police found that the side door had been forced open by a crowbar. They also found cigarette butts and an empty tube used for drugs. They think he had been watching the house for a while. I installed some security on the house after this. I can't imagine what would have happened if he had come to my room first.
This is why you should never spread rumors. Once there was a girl called Grace who always wore a hat to school. Even in the summer, she always had a knitted black beanie pulled down to her eyes. Soon, the rumors started around school. Some people said she must have bald patches or have another medical condition that the students didn't know about. Either way, she was constantly bullied for always wearing that hat. One day, Grace's class had a new teacher whose eyes immediately fell on Grace. She said, "No hats in class." Grace's eyes widened and she went pale. "Well, what are you waiting for? Take it off." Grace replied, "I can't." The teacher grew angry, reached over, grabbed the hat, and yanked it off of Grace's head. The room fell silent. Then screams, vomit, terror, and chaos. The back of Grace's head was blown open. Bits of skull caved into her head. A small matching hole sat on her forehead near her hairline. Grace then stood up and ran out of the room, sobbing. That was the last anyone has ever seen of Grace. A couple years passed and people stopped talking about it as much until a new kid joined their class. A kid who always wears a scarf. Can you solve this mystery? This is the story of a strange man whose house mysteriously caught on fire, but things are not as they seem. All the clues to what really happened are hidden in what I'm about to say. So this man is what we would call a hoarder, but instead of collecting things like books or clothing, he collected garbage. Eventually this bothered the neighbors, especially the terrible smell that came from the house. Then a reporter came around wanting to understand why he did it, but the man refused to speak. That night he watched the reporter talk about him on the news, saying he was a desperate man with a lot of debt who developed a strange habit after his wife ran away. The man didn't care. He just continued to stuff his house full of garbage from the floor to the ceiling. However, one day an incident caught a lot of attention. The house mysteriously caught on fire. The man was not in the house, so he was safe, but when he returned, everything had turned to ash. Some people suspected an angry neighbor might have done it, but the man didn't seem bothered at all. Actually, it was convenient for him. He collected insurance and got himself a small apartment. He never collected garbage again. He didn't need to anymore. What really happened here? Can you solve this?
So I had gotten a crush on the quiet kid at school, and I invited him over. And things started to get weird when I cut my knee open and he licked the blood off my knee and said that it tasted good. So anyways, we're in our kitchen and we're just making food. And he's petting my dog, telling me how much he loves my dog. And I turn around for 2 seconds. And I wish to God I can make this up. I turn around and he has a knife to my dog's neck. And I'm like, what the hell are you doing? And he's like, oh, I'm just joking with you, ha 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 ha. So I grabbed the knife from him and I put it back where it belongs and I'm like, okay, let's go out on my trampoline. Reminder, at this point, it was pitch black outside. So we're jumping on my trampoline when I feel something hit me in the face. So I look at him and then he starts beating me up. And I'm not talking play fighting. This kid is genuinely beating me up. So I'm standing there in shock when he gives me another whack to the face and I fall to the floor,